This podcast is brought to you by Free Buddhist Audio, the Dharma for your life. Our work is funded entirely by donations from our generous listeners. If you would like to help us keep this free, make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. Thank you, and happy listening.
So we're going to have to use our imaginations. Is there anyone who has not seen a depiction of the Tibetan Wheel of Life? Maybe a few people who haven't. Yeah. So I'll begin just by describing it. It's an image of several circles within circles, like a mandala. And there's a lot of pictures in the sections of those circles. And this whole thing, this wheel, is held by a creature, a monstrous-looking creature, like a demon. So Arvid's pulling one up on his phone. He can maybe pass that around. And there's a lot of meaning in the different images and in the levels of the wheel. And so over the next several weeks, with the help of some of those images in the coming weeks, we'll be looking at what all that means and how the Wheel of Life is both a teaching tool and actually a mirror, something that we look into and see aspects of ourselves. And for this morning, we're looking at the very center of the wheel. So what's in the middle of the wheel? That's what we're looking at this morning. We're looking at the very center and the ring around the very center. And there's actually a lot of stuff going on in those two rings. A lot of stuff going on there. So at the center of the wheel, we see three animals. There's a pig, a snake, and a rooster. Three animals in the center of the wheel. And then around the three animals, there's a circle that's split in half. And one half of the circle is white, and the other half of the circle is black. And in the white half of the circle, you see various depictions of people in some sort of process of ascension. And in the black part of the circle, you see people in various depictions that seem to be falling. So those are the two rings. The ring beyond that depicts 6 realms of existence, and the ring beyond that depicts the 12 nidanas, the 12 links of conditioned co-production, which form a very core aspect of the Buddha's teaching. And that's all held by Yama, the demon of impermanence. Yama is one of the forms of Mara, and in this form represents really death and impermanence, and how the whole wheel is captive in Yama's hands and feet. You can see he's clutching onto it with his hands and his feet. So, at the center of the wheel, we have these 3 animals, and they mean something. They're biting each other's tails. They're in a circle, and they're biting each other's tails. In this sense of something cyclic gets repeated in the various rings of the circle. But the animals represent what we were meditating on this morning. So they represent the poisons, the afflictions of greed, hatred, and delusion. So the rooster represents craving or raga. The snake represents hatred. And the pig represents delusion. So just remembering that these are symbols and not the actual things, yeah? Because pigs are lovely, snakes are lovely, roosters are beautiful creatures. If you're lucky enough to have seen a video online of wild piglets, and And if you're lucky enough to have shared that with somebody, your algorithm is going to show you a lot of videos of wild piglets running, and they're delightful. They're delightful. They're delightful. But in this case, the pig represents delusion because of the burying their face in the ground to root out food, right? So snake represents hatred because of the potential harm that a snake, poisonous bites, can give to someone. And the rooster represents craving because, has anyone ever been around chickens or raised chickens? Roosters don't do very nice things in the chicken pen, and so they represent craving. But all as Buddhists, we are trying to practice kindness, and of course, we don't villainize these creatures. We're just using some of the aspects of these creatures to talk about our experience and our lack. Those creatures are just being animals. Yeah, they're just doing what animals do. But we're seeing ourselves in those animals, and that's what we're really looking at. We're looking at the snake of our hatred, the pig of our delusion, the rooster of our craving. Yeah, we're looking at that within ourselves. So the word for poison is klesha. These are three kleshas. It can also be translated as defilement or affliction, so called because they afflict the mind or they poison the mind. And this is evocative because we also often use water symbolism to talk about consciousness in Buddhism and to talk about even higher states of consciousness. And so with the list of mental hindrances, for instance, there's a water symbol for each of those hindrances. And the water symbol for a mind full of hatred is water that's boiling, for instance. So if I imagine my mind is water and I imagine it being poisoned, I get an image of like someone with a dropper dropping in drops of poison, and then you know how that clouds water slowly? It enters the water and then it billows out until the water is permeated by whatever that other liquid is. That's how I kind of imagine it myself. So these three kleshas, these three poisons, are the three big bads. These are seen as the root of all other flavors of negative emotion, all other shades of negative emotion or of emotion that causes suffering. There are longer lists found in the Buddhist tradition, but these three unwholesome roots are at the beginning of all of those. So some of the other poisons that are sometimes include things like pride, for instance. Yeah. And there's a connection here with these three kleshas to the first two of the Noble Truths, which is basically communicating that human beings experience life as difficult because we cling to what we want, because we crave. So the focus in the first two Noble Truths is on craving. It's on our tendency to fixate on things. It's on our tendency to grasp, and how that makes life worse for us instead of living life more open-handedly or more open-heartedly. And the focus there is on craving, and I think that's wise. I think the Buddha could have chosen hatred or ignorance, and I think you can do that. You can play with the Four Noble Truths, and you can talk about the origin of suffering as being hatred or as being ignorance. But I feel like craving is a bit more fundamental than either, in a sense. Well, it's the one you notice more so than ignorance. Ignorance tends to be perhaps not as emotionally noticeable in the body, and ignorance by its very nature means you're not aware of it. So it tends to be the basis for how hatred and craving arises. But But we talk about hatred or aversion as frustrated craving. Yeah. So this is a very interesting dynamic. We crave, and when that's frustrated, we want things to be a particular way. And when that's frustrated, one of the responses might be anger, a pushing against, a wanting to break through, a wanting to eliminate the source of our frustration. And of course, that gets very complicated and wound up with lots of views about life and politics and everything else. Yeah. The three poisons, very much the root of human suffering, and right at the beginning of the wheel. The Buddha fiercely underlined the reality of this in a very early teaching called the fire sermon, the fire sermon. And he said, "Mendicants, all is burning. And what is the all that is burning? The eye is burning. Sights are burning. Eye consciousness is burning. Eye contact is burning. The painful, pleasant, or neutral feeling that arises conditioned by eye contact is also burning. Burning with what? Burning with the fires of greed, hate, and delusion. Burning with rebirth, old age, and death, with sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and distress." He then goes through all of the senses. So you get this image of our experience of the senses, essentially our experience of the world, as being on fire. This image is echoed later in the tradition in the Lotus Sutra, where you see the image of children playing in a burning house, with the Buddha standing outside of the burning house, coaxing the children out, and the children ignoring the Buddha, and continuing to play in the burning house until he tricks them to come out on their own. But what's being said in this first part of the stanza is pretty interesting. He says, what is the all that is burning? So what is on fire? Well, first of all, he points to the eye. So our sense of seeing, our sense of vision. And then he points to sights, to what we see, what we perceive with that faculty. And then he points to the consciousness, the perception, the contact of that process of the sense coming into contact with the sense object, and the awareness that that's happening. And if we're visually impaired, we might reflect on different senses, on how sounds come into contact with our capacity to hear, or how the quality of touch, the things we feel, come into contact with our sense of touch, and how that gives rise to an awareness. If you remember if you ever had the traumatic experience of a child at Halloween putting your hand in a bucket of peeled grapes, like when the teachers used to do these haunted houses, and the scary thing was like feeling peeled grapes. It was more gross than scary. But, and then sometimes we touch really nice things. We feel textures that we really enjoy, of course. So this teaching is really focusing on the human predicament, and it's saying that, yes, there are enjoyable experiences, which end, and which we tend to cling to. And it's our clinging which causes the friction, which causes the flame, which causes the fire, right? It's our clinging. And he's saying, look, you're on fire. That is painful, and you can do something about it. You can put out that fire, right? So that's kind of where Buddhism starts. And when you really start to see that, when you really start to connect with that reality of how these three poisons, craving, hatred, and delusion, these three animals fighting in our hearts, when you connect with how much pain that causes for you, and you start seeing through it, and you start letting that go, you get a sense for a completely different possibility of life. And that's really what the Buddha is pointing to, and pointing us towards. He doesn't say everything's on fire and then leave you with that. He says everything's on fire. There's a lake you can jump in, and that lake is nirvana. That lake is the absence of craving, the absence of hatred, the absence of delusion. So that's the center of the wheel. So we can get a sense of our own sort of beastie nature in that way. And we can get a sense of how we carry and how we tend to create suffering for ourselves through engaging in the poisons, through allowing the poisons to continue to cloud our minds. One thing I appreciate, having been brought up as a Catholic boy, is that there's nothing in here about original sin. There's nothing in here about it being my fault. There's nothing in here about it being a woman's fault, which is very important. About, Eve's fault. There's nothing in here like that. And in fact, when the Buddha was asked questions about, well, how did this all start? He would redirect people towards their present experience and saying, look, it doesn't matter how it started. It's been going on forever in an endless cycle. What you have to do now is work with what's present. And he said, asking how it started was like getting shot with an arrow. And instead of seeking healing, becoming obsessed with who shot that arrow? What's it made out of? What sort of poison is it? Why did they shoot me? Why did this happen to me? All of that. Quite natural questions in a way. But the Buddha was saying, look, you're making this worse for yourself. You've got to heal, right? You've got to pull the arrow out. You've got to heal. You've got to put out the fire, right? So he was very practical in that sense. The big sort of questions about cosmology and origins of things were not taken very seriously in his view of spiritual life. He was much more interested in pointing out how we liberate ourselves, how we find nirvana. So moving on, the second layer of the wheel. So we have a half circle of light, a half circle of darkness, with beings either ascending or descending. And this represents the processes of our actions and the fruition, the results, the consequences of our actions. And what we're seeing here is the fruition of skillful or unskillful actions of body, speech, and mind. So we take quite seriously in Buddhist teaching what we do with our bodies and the impact of that on the world and on ourselves. We take quite seriously the impact of our communication, what that does internally and externally, and how that affects our lives and the lives of other people. And we take quite seriously how we think and the consequences of our thinking on our internal world and how that affects how we view the world and how we behave in the world. So body, speech, and the mind. Do we behave skillfully or unskillfully? And following on from that, if we behave unskillfully, we tend to create more pain for ourselves and other people. And if we behave skillfully, we tend to create a happiness and benefit for ourselves and for other people. So what is skillful and unskillful? Well, first of all, before I get into that, I just want to clear up something we can thank our pop culture for. So we can thank our pop culture that everyone knows what karma is. Everyone's probably heard that word. And we can also be a bit critical of our pop culture because it was communicated wrongly. Karma means action. It doesn't mean what happens to you. Karma means action. Karma is about what you do. It's not fate. Karma is not fate. The term which refers to the consequences of our actions is actually karma vipaka. So it's vipaka that refers to the consequences of our actions. And it still doesn't mean fate. It doesn't mean fate. It doesn't mean that if something bad happens to you, it's because you've behaved badly. Yeah? Doesn't necessarily mean that at all. On the other hand, I know that if I'm grumpy and if I snap at someone, that tends to make my life a lot worse pretty quickly. And you probably have your own examples of that when you can see yourself behaving in a particular way and making your life a lot worse. That's karma vipaka. And sometimes it's instant. Yeah, sometimes it's instant. And sometimes it's a long time coming. So the line should be, what is it? Instant karma is going to get you. It should be instant karma vipaka is going to get you. So, just slip that in there. Yeah. It's a bit more of a mouthful. So yeah, skillful. Let's see. Do you have any guesses, first of all, as to what unskillful deeds of body, speech, and mind are?
What they are.
Huh?
Those usually what they are.
What are unskillful? What are the roots of unskillful actions of body, speech, and minds?
What? Craving.
Craving, yeah.
Criminals.
And
Well, the roots are the three poisons: greed, hatred, and delusion.
yeah, it's a trick question. It's definitely a trick question. Yeah.
Greed. It's obvious.
Greed, hatred, and delusion. This is how unskillful actions are defined, and this is referred to as akusala. Skillful is the opposite. So if we think about the opposite of greed or craving, generosity, contentment. Opposite of hatred,
Love,
love,
kindness,
compassion, kindness. Opposite of delusion, wisdom, clarity. Yep. So skillful action is based on these mental qualities. And in Buddha's teaching, we are very much encouraged to own our unskillfulness and change it, and to live more skillfully. And we acknowledge that that is a process. And so in the meditation this morning, where we were bringing metta to our own capacity for love and generosity, and when we were also bringing metta for the mistakes we've made, for the failures we've made in relation to those potentials, we were really exploring a process of integration and a process in which we were acknowledging that we're not perfect, and that we're very much developing, transforming people, and that that's okay, actually. And hopefully, if we make mistakes, we can repair, right? We can make good on those mistakes, whether they're internal or external. Traditionally, the opposite of the three poisons is actually usually depicted in negative terms. But this is not to say that there's nothing there. So the opposite of delusion is non-delusion. The opposite of greed is non-attachments. The opposite of hatred is non-hatred. But we are not led to believe that there's just nothing there. So you have the absence of the poison, but you also have the presence of something else. You have the absence of hatred. When hatred is absent, love, kindness is present, or is at least a potential to be present. Yeah. And in Buddhist ethical sensibility, what makes a behavior skillful or unskillful is the state of mind in which you do it in. My favorite example of that is when I give a gift because I want to give a gift versus when I give a gift because I feel obliged to give a gift, if you know what I mean. Yeah. So we probably all have funny stories about holidays or birthdays where we've had to buy something for somebody that maybe we didn't care about, or we didn't want to spend the money on, but we did it anyway out of a sense of obligation. And that is a type of generosity, but it's not the fullness of generosity that we're going for. And that might be the starting point at some time. You might notice that sense of obligation, and then you might say to yourself, you know what, I can do better than this. I can turn that sense of obligation into something that's genuinely more reflective of an act of generosity. So the state of mind in which we do things is very important. And it's important that we know that there's always a choice. And the choice is either to evolve or to regress. So we can either evolve into these more integrated states of love and generosity and so on, or we can just cycle through into our most destructive qualities and create more pain. So that's what the two circles of ascension and descension refer to, as people either behaving skillfully and creating happiness for the world, or behaving unskillfully and creating destruction. And this is the first lines of the Dhammapada, really, one of the collections of the Buddha's teaching. Here it is stated, mind precedes all mental states. Mind is their chief. They are all mind-wrought. If with an impure mind a person speaks or acts, suffering follows like the wheel that follows the foot of the ox. So it just happens. There's no one punishing. There's no one keeping track of how you behave. And, the world's not punishing you. The universe isn't punishing you. It's just conditionality. If you engage in life with an impure mind, the wheel follows. That's you taking a step, and the wheel just follows, right? It's just like that. That's how that happens. Following on from that, mind precedes all mental states. Mind is their chief. They are all mind-wrought. If with a pure mind a person speaks or acts, happiness follows like a never departing shadow. So it's just there, right? If you behave with a pure heart, again, there's no one keeping a tally. I mean, you might, I might, but there's no force in the universe noticing that and rewarding you. It's just like your shadow. It's just there. The fruit of that skillful behavior is just there. And you might notice it right on as a good feeling or as something that gets reflected back to you from another person. But it also might just be something that builds over time and changes the course of your life through the process of conditionality over time. These tendencies towards destruction become less and less, and these tendencies towards happiness become greater and greater. And at some point, those scales tip, and there's no going back. That's what the teaching of the Buddha is. At some point, the mind is purified. At some point, the process comes to its fullness, and you attain nirvana. And the roots of greed, hatred, and delusion are completely dispersed from your being. This is the reality that we are aspiring to as Buddhists. So the daily grind of noticing hatred and greed and processing it and trying to be better people, it pays off. It means something. It leads to the absence of that suffering. It leads to the quenching of the fire.
We hope you enjoyed this week's podcast. Please help us keep this free. Make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. And thank you.